morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of the Ashland Independent Film Festival. I'm Richard Herskowitz, the director. And were any of you at the TalkBack yesterday morning? Amazing. All of these are going to be recorded and will be online in a couple of weeks, so you can spread the word about them. I want to thank all our supporters that make it possible for us to have these as free events and to record them and make them available widely. And I want to thank you for coming. So, as you probably noticed, there is a theme within this festival, and it may seem dark, the apocalypse theme, but one of the things we're addressing are apocalyptic threats to environment and species, including salmon species and human species. And yet there's a focus on activists, people who are responding and trying to alter that future. So this panel was brought together, several of the filmmakers who have made environmental related works, and we were lucky enough to have here to moderate the panel 2 of the filmmakers of one of the films in the program, Metamorphosis. They've come here from Canada, and they are Nova Ami, who is over there. She creates, Nova creates socially relevant, thought-provoking films that inspire and educate. Her work has screened at international festivals, including Hot Docs and IDFA, and has been broadcast on the BBC, CBC, on and on. Velcrow Ripper, sitting beside her, creates powerful cinematic features. Velcrow, very well known in Canada, and his involvement with the National Film Board productions. I met him, we're sitting across, we were staying in the same bed and breakfast at Toronto a few years ago, where his work was being featured in their festival. Anyway, his epic Fierce Light Trilogy began with Scared Sacred, winner of the 2005 Genie Award for Best Feature Documentary, and continued with 2008's award-winning Fierce Light When Spirit Meets Action, and concluded with Occupy Love 2013. Now I'm going to turn things over to Velcrow and Nova.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, and welcome to our panel this morning. I think we're going to dive right in and hear from our fellow environmental filmmakers. Today we have Josh Murphy in the middle, who we don't actually know the title of your film other than Secret Screening. Can you reveal what the title is?
We can. The film is called Artificial, and it was a film that was supported by Patagonia, and it looks at the effects of human arrogance in trying to control salmon, and how through the film we can see how we're having great effects on the world by thinking that we perhaps are better than nature.
Josh, could you spell artificial?
ARTIFISHAL. Did I get that right?
Okay, great. And to my left is Jessica Orrick, whose film One Man Dies a Million Times. And I'll get you to introduce it more in a second. And then we have Reed Harkness, whose film Forest on Fire.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so it'd be great. Actually, we could just go down and we could each talk a little bit about our films and what they are before we dive into some more questions. So why don't we start on the left? Nova, what's Metamorphosis about?
Okay. Metamorphosis is a feature documentary that's looking at change in a time of climate crisis. It's looking at how humanity is dealing with change during this time, and it's also looking at solutions, things that we can do to spark the imagination, innovations that are taking place around the world. And it also incorporates art that deals with environmental themes, as well as looking at the psychological and emotional impacts of climate change.
So Jessica, do you want to describe your film and talk a bit about it?
Sure. One Man Dies a Million Times is part fiction, part documentary. It's a true story that took place during World War II about the siege of Leningrad, when the world's very first seed bank, which was started before we even understood genetics, nowadays our seed banks are all frozen in cryogenic slumber. But back then, in order to keep seeds viable, you had to plant the seeds, grow the food, harvest the food, and keep the seeds for the next year. And so during the siege of Leningrad, when there were 900 days where there was no food into St. Petersburg and 1 in every 4 people were starving to death, this group of scientists protected their seeds, growing this food and choosing not to eat it because they believed that what they were doing would shape the future. So it's a true story, and all of the, there are a lot of documentary elements in the film, but the film is actually transplanted into the future. So it takes place in sort of an alternative present, near future. So the characters are really recognizable, the city's really recognizable, but it's very much real. So.
Josh, you mentioned a little bit about your film. Is there anything else you want to add to your description? Or?
Well, maybe not to the description, because we can go into that more, but
Sure.
We are so excited to be here specifically because
Ditto.
I'll get a little closer. We are premiering at Tribeca Film Festival April 25th, and we had already submitted to Ashland and had to quietly kind of find another way, and it was so important that we kind of requested of Tribeca that we be here because of the relevancy to this region. And so we're excited to be here, and that's why we had to kind of keep it quiet.
Hence the secret screening.
When is that screening?
Today at noon and tomorrow at 3.
Okay, great. Well, since we're doing that, Jessica, when is your film showing?
Today at 3 and tomorrow at noon. So if you guys get them mixed up.
Alternate.
I'm wrong.
Okay, great. So, Reed, do you want to talk a bit about your film and also tell us when it's screening?
Sure. Forest on Fire is my film. And it's a film about the Eagle Creek Fire, a major wildfire here in Oregon that ravaged the Columbia River Gorge scenic area. And it was started by a teenager throwing a lit firework. So it sparked this really big conversation, maybe reached down here, but in Portland especially, it was a really big deal, and it affected Portland, especially the communities of Cascade Locks that were, the communities that were in the gorge pretty drastically. So the film tells the story of the fire, but specifically gets into understanding the kind of the human element of what a disaster does to a community.
Great.
Can we talk about our filmmaking approaches and in terms of how our previous films perhaps and whether the films that we have at this festival are similar or different? Is this the environmental film that you made a standalone type piece, or is it sort of a part of a body of work that's very similar? Would you like to answer first, Velcrow?
Okay, sure. Put me on the spot. Well, I've done my very first feature documentary actually was called Bones of the Forest in 1996. I think I finished it, and it was all about elders of the Pacific Northwest, specifically British Columbia, and those elders were both humans and trees. And so it was about the ancient temperate rainforests of British Columbia, and the characters were all native elders and non-native elders. I think you had to be over 80 to get into that film. And it was involved spending 5 years living in these forests and filming in the forest, and that really is also where I'm from. So it was really a beautiful way to really get in touch with my bioregion. And back then, it felt like things were really out of control, and so it's been so long that I've had this awareness. And then when we, so moving forward, Metamorphosis, it's about the climate crisis. And I feel like the world is finally starting to catch up to what a lot of us have known for a long, long time. And as we were making the film, the climate crisis seemed to be getting closer and closer to home. So the approach has shifted because Bones of the Forest was shot in 16 millimeter. It was quite experimental and a lot of handheld. I didn't use tripods that much. But when Nova and I set out to make Metamorphosis, we both wanted to do something different than our previous work. So the question we asked ourselves was, how can we take this to the next level? So we really upped our production values. We wanted to do something in the vein of Baraka or Koyaanisqatsi, if you're familiar with those films, but with words. So our approach was quite different. We didn't have any talking heads in the films. That was a big decision. We made no talking heads. We didn't even film talking heads. And our film board, National Film Board was like, well, don't you want to just film them in case? But no, we made a decision. So we used audio recordings only for the interviews, which actually really loosened people up quite a bit. And the people were shown in portrait shots. So do you want to add anything to? Or why don't you answer the question? We'll go down.
Yeah, sure. We really, just to continue on that vein, cinematically, we really wanted to up our game as well, and so we really wanted to photograph things in a very epic way, and so we used a lot of techniques such as drone photography, and we used macro lenses, we used motion time lapse, it was something that we really felt was important for this particular film. My previous films were more character driven, and so this one is very different from those films, but I felt like it was time to try something different. Yeah. Did you want to speak to that, Jessica?
Sure. I do want to just preface this. I flew in from Korea last night, so it's the middle of the night for me. So if I sound a little loopy, I'm not crazy, I'm just tired. Sure. So all my previous films are documentaries, and they're all based in ethnobiology, the way that cultures interact with the natural world. And that's always been fascinating to me. I studied filmmaking and biology, ecology, and environmental history in school. I knew I wanted to make nature films, but I also worked as a docent at the American Museum of Natural History and a live animal keeper. And so I got to watch a lot of different cultures interact with live animals on a regular basis, every day, thousands of people coming through. And getting to see that the way that different cultures were taught to look at nature was so fascinating to me that became my focus and remains my focus, and is still something I really care about. So.
Oh, interesting. Very cool.
I am a little hazy as well. I just came in from Oslo, Norway, where we had a screening.
Okay.
But we're so glad to be here.
Exactly. It's really, this film for me was a real amazing full circle. I had, as a child, my idol was Jacques Cousteau, and I went into science and have 2 degrees in fisheries biology and natural resource, and I thought of Cousteau as a scientist. And then, oddly enough, I was a competitive and professional skier for some time, and I wanted to start making movies. And as an author, they say, write what you know. And so I said, well, I should film what I know. And so let me just film with these guys that I compete with. And the first film was successful enough to do that for 6 years, and all I did was make action sports films. And the whole time I kept thinking, there's much bigger stories to tell. And I realized that later, and of course recognized that Cousteau's real legacy is as a filmmaker. And when I started pushing more towards finding the power of film through narrative projects. The first narrative feature I worked on actually screened here, and I think that was, can't remember now, it's 2012, which was The River Why, which was an adaptation of David Duncan's book. I was a co-producer and second unit director of that. And then more recently, we made a different kind of horror film, which was a post-apocalyptic thriller that won the Tribeca Film Festival in 2016, it's kind of a dark narrative film. But then this one came around in a very odd form, in that we were making a piece for 1% for the Planet, which was a nonprofit started by Patagonia founder Yvon Chouinard. And over lunch, somebody said, hey, what are you working on, Yvon? And he said, I'm working on a film about the arrogance of man. And I was perked up, because to me that sounded like an interesting topic. And then he said, it's how we're unwilding salmon through the use of hatcheries and fish farms, and how we've forgotten what the original thing was that we fell in love with. And I nearly dropped my sandwich in my lap and said, I know a couple things about that. And this launched 2.5 years into the making of what we like to say is a beautiful film about an ugly issue. And so we needed to kind of find beauty in celebrating something that's still very difficult to kind of observe. And that was kind of the technique that helped unlock our story, which was finding absurdities, but still painting it in a way that we could actually connect to it visually.
If I appear at all hazy, it's from the Bloody Mary at breakfast.
Well done.
But
Want another?
if you have one, can you remind me of the question?
Sure. If you want, yeah. If you would just want to talk about your previous work and your approach to filmmaking, and if this is a continuation or a departure.
Yeah. This is a departure and a return. So I think as a very young person, I started a pretty clear filmmaking path doing short films, and somehow got kind of corralled into like the commercial world, and that became kind of my filmmaking for a long time. And then kind of out of the blue, I was approached by topic.com, who commissioned this film, Forest on Fire. They are an online magazine, and they really support filmmakers. And they said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing a film about the Eagle Creek Fire?" And I jumped on it, and it was just a really great experience. And they also encouraged film festival submission, and it just feels really good to be back in this world.
Great. Yeah, thank you all. Really interesting topics. I'd love to explore what are some of the specific challenges that you face doing environmental films. What are some of the special challenges that you're dealing with? You mentioned finding the beauty and the ugliness, and how do we get these subjects across in this time where there's so much at stake, and we have to communicate. Do you want to?
Are we like going in a row?
No,
or
we
sort
can-
of
whoever
jump
wants
in?
to speak.
Want to jump in? Somebody want
Yeah.
to jump in and do it a different way this time? Somebody feel.
I mean, for me, I can just I'll jump in.
Yeah.
My family is all over the place. I have a lot of family that disagree about practically everything, and so it's really important for me that my films are something that anybody could watch, and that nobody is going to see my film and think, oh, it's just too liberal for my tastes, or oh, I can't, I like my grandfather was in World War II, and so he has a thing against the Japanese, and I made a film in Japan, but he was really moved by it, and he was, and I think that that's something that as an environmental filmmaker, you sort of automatically get boxed into like bleeding heart liberal, wah, wah, wah. And for so much of my family, they won't go see a film like that. So I think that's an important part of it for me, is trying to make it so that I'm not telling anyone that they're wrong about the way they live their lives.
Maybe adding to that, I think just approaching from pure curiosity, personal curiosity seems to be my best approach, just and feels like inspires the most authenticity, as curious as I can be.
I think one of the big challenges is just we're all put into boxes right away. You can have a box being a genre film, box being a drama, box being an action thriller, box being a documentary, box being an environmental documentary. And the challenge is how to expand that box and try to pull in more people, because if you have a relevant film that's not just about a very small issue that you're trying to really pinpoint, you want more eyeballs in. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have as filmmakers today is that every film ever made is available today. So when we make a film, we're making a film that is competing against the attention of every film ever made. And so how do we use our messaging to bring people into that moment and that film and be engaged with it before they're off to something else? Because we all have short attention spans, but we want to try to target them, enlarge the family, if you will, of viewership while we can.
Mm-hmm. Just to speak to all the films that are available at this point, one thing that we experience with making a film about environmental themes is how do we, one of the challenges is how do we make it fresh, or how do we invite people to come to see this film? How do we entice people to come and see the film? Because we experience, a lot of, sort of reactions when we say we're making a film about climate change. People kind of go, oh, I don't want to see another film about climate change. And so, one of our challenges is, how can we make something that anyone will want to come and see. And one of our intentions with making the film, Metamorphosis, was to create something that was an invitation and not a confrontation. And so we have been hearing from the people who've seen the film too, is just an appreciation of that kind of tone of the film. And because I guess a lot of audiences have felt judged or felt like they had fingers pointed at them when watching a film about the environment.
Yeah, we tried very hard not to make it preachy. And also our NFB producers were from a province of Canada called Alberta, which is kind of our Texas. It's the main oil-producing province in Canada. It's where the tar sands are from as well. It's why Canada is so horrible on the climate change front, is really because of the tar sands. And so our producers presented us with this challenge. He said, we want this film to play in Alberta. Without compromising its message. And I think we succeeded in that. In fact, it keeps playing in Alberta. We've had a good theatrical run there, and people are booking it left, right, and center. So I think in that sense it did succeed. I don't think that's necessary for every film. And I think it's important to have films that are a range of films, hardcore activist films. And I don't buy the preaching to the choir argument either. Some people say, oh, this film's preaching to the choir. Well, sometimes the choir needs some preaching. Sometimes the choir needs a fire lit under and needs some, lit under them.
Rejuvenation.
Rejuvenation and inspiration. So I don't buy that argument. But for this particular film, yes, it was very much intended to invite a wide range of people. And the visuals, and keeping the beauty close, I think was really helpful. A lot of people said they watched the film, and even though it doesn't shy away from how hard the issues are, it also keeps the beauty, and that beauty can be in humanity, but in our case it was in the natural world, and we kept coming back to that, and so that we could keep falling in love with the planet again and again. Yeah.
What do you feel your responsibility is as a filmmaker with a film about environmental themes towards the audience? Do you feel, for example, that we need to offer some kind of hope? Or what do you feel your role is?
That's a good question. I think sometimes the role is a provocateur, and other times the role is to pull people in, but it depends what the meaning and the intent of the film is. And I think, to your point, yes, trying to preach the choir, you sometimes do need to get a hallelujah from the house of God, if you will. But at the same time, we also have to say, where do we have to poke somebody in the eye to get a reaction? In this film that we made, there's quite a few moments when people didn't want to talk to us. And so we had to kind of gently, and sometimes not quite so gently, provoke them into having a reaction. And I think that's where it depends on the subject and the characters. If they're willingly talking, great. But if not, how do you still get to the same core without kind of coercing? Because I think you still need to be authentic, and you need to let people share their divergent worldviews so that we as an audience can derive from that our own kind of interpretation of what's right and wrong, as opposed to telling them what's right and wrong. Because we get served a lot of propaganda quite often, and I think when we can observe and then come away with it, and if we as filmmakers can nudge one way, great, but at the same time we have to be honest.
Yeah, I would say if hope is part of the storyline, then that makes sense, but that if it's not, that would be, that wouldn't be authentic to your storyline. So the storyline should be what it is. And if you're making a film, I mean, in this film, Forest on Fire, I think that it does turn into hope, but that's only because the story took us there.
Mm-hmm. Great. How about you, Jessica? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that there's really a place for a spectrum, and that all of it's all really important to have so many different types of films out there. But I have a hard time getting out of bed in the morning and feeling like I have a space to make a difference in the world. And so I think hope is really important, because otherwise I think a lot of people just freeze and think, well, there's nothing I can do as an individual, but 7 billion people are saying the same thing. So I think hope's pretty important, but that's my,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well-
one actually thought that somebody just shared with me that I thought would be really relevant here was that it's sometimes easier to be against something than it is to be for something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being for something, even if the hurdle is high that you have to jump over, that gives you hope. Because in pursuing it, you actually find, daily purpose, even though that is a really high hurdle.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, I just the time scale of things now, with the immediacy of the way our culture works, we can't get people to stop smoking, even though they know they have those repercussions coming, but it's still far into the future. And in my film, these scientists are sacrificing their lives for something that's a future so far into they don't even know if it'll be their great-great-great-grandchildren. I mean, the idea, sort of the time scale of the way people think and the conviction and the hope that people have, I think that's shifting, and I think it's important to sort of push a little bit back on that and extend the timeline a little bit.
Yeah. I think the questions around hope are really important in this era, and to explore what hope really means. I don't know if anyone saw my film Scared Sacred, which showed at this festival years ago, but it was my journey to the ground zeros of the world in search of hope. So I went to the places where you would least likely find hope and searched for it. And I think one newspaper said I could find the silver lining in a mushroom cloud. And in fact, I did in Hiroshima, because many of the survivors that I met were some of the most inspiring people I've met, and they had a kind of industrial strength spirituality, and their hope came from taking action to try to stop what had happened to them from happening to other people. And really learned to look at some of the differences between things like hope and optimism, which are not the same. Optimism can be Pollyanna, because optimism is based on the idea that everything's going to be okay, so maybe I don't need to worry about it. Whereas hope actually is an active verb. It doesn't mean you know what the outcome is going to be, but you're going to work despite the odds to try to create a positive outcome. So I think hope is really important. And in terms of our film, it is we also really wanted to make it a deeper. We didn't want to make it a surface level hope, and we wanted it to go. We wanted you to really have a journey and feel into the depths of it, and I think that's important too.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we did develop another aspect to our film to help guide people through that phase of hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But before we go there, just wanted to ask if anyone here, while you were making your film, did your initial vision shift or change at all because of the conditions that were coming up, or any new information you were getting? And if so, how?
And it'd be nice to hear just a little bit about the process of making the film too.
Yeah.
So let's go down.
Or did it stay exactly the same?
I'll jump down from here. Okay. Yeah. Forest on Fire, we were given this opportunity by TalkBack to do a film about the Eagle Creek Fire, and just jumped in and started developing what that could be, and was going down a lot of different paths. And there was, it was the summer of last year, and all of a sudden these fires started happening as we're filming a story about the fire the previous year. And so there's this idea, well, maybe we just need to go to the next fire and start filming that, and then, see what story arises of that. And it was we could see the fire, and we could go and film that fire that was happening, but it took a lot of kind of reining in and realizing that to stick to the storyline that was at hand. So we stuck with the Eagle Creek Fire. Another little tangent was maybe we just go and we follow this Hot Shots unit at Warm Springs, made up of Native American kids that go and put out wildfires, and like maybe that would be fascinating. But it ended up being this more intensive look at the Eagle Creek Fire.
We had a very interesting task because we knew the point we wanted to make, and we started to tell the story. And it became very clear that in telling the story, we weren't getting the larger impact of the story. And at one point, which we call the dark days, Laura Wagner, who's our producer, and Colin, who's co-writer and editor in the corner there, they know that the dark days were where we got to a point in the film where we felt like we have these elements, but it's not a film. It didn't have the punch. And it became very concerning because we didn't feel like we had a film that was of the caliber of message that we wanted to have. And Laura actually found this wonderful article written by Ira Glass, who's the host of This American Life. And he said he's approached with stories all the time, and he has to move quickly through stories and find out how to approach a story. And he finds what he calls this moment of joy, where he finds an oddity, an eccentricity, something that allows him into the story, and that's where he begins. And so in our case, we said, well, hold on a second. We've got this huge range of absurdities of humans trying to control nature. Let's just go observe the absurdities. And once we started to stop telling and start observing, all of a sudden things really started to click into place. And we found the drama that wasn't being conveyed by just the telling. And I think that is the key, is finding the mode of story. Because you start out one way, and you push on it, and you realize, nah, it might not work. And then you have to redirect. But it's a lot of trust to do that. Like, I think filmmaking, specifically documentary filmmaking, is like, somebody once said to me, it's like walking into a dark room with a flashlight. And you know there's another end, but every step you take illuminates a little bit more until you find your way bumbling across the side of the room, and then there's the door. But I think that's the process that we kind of have to embrace, because we know what we want to tell, but we're not sure how we get there until we do it.
Yeah, we often say it's like being a detective, being a documentary filmmaker. And as you go along, you uncover clues that lead to other clues that lead in all sorts of different directions. So, yeah.
It's a little bit different with my previous films, because working in documentary, like you said, it's a very organic process where I would just go to a country and spend a ton of time just observing and then build from there. This film was different because it's narrative and it was a true story. So it was in a way already written for me. And it's very unhip to say, but my process is not, well, I mean, I was driving across Kansas and I saw the entire film in my head. Like, I just like connected to some other entity, and there was an alien, and the film was there.
Oh, good, we got the aliens in the...
Yeah, there are no aliens in my film.
Wait for the Q&A for those questions, but that's okay.
What channel is your head on? I want to get that channel.
Yeah. But so there wasn't a whole lot of me building the film. It just was already there, existing, and I just had to keep going back to that.
That same thing happened to me. It was really weird.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Kansas, right?
Same planet.
Definitely did not happen to me.
No, it didn't really happen to us either. I think, well, I mean, how would you say our process was in making Metamorphosis?
The process?
Yeah.
Well, when we were developing the film, Velcrow and I used to go on these walk and talks through nature. And we would sort of brainstorm and talk about our ideas for the film while we were in nature. It would really inspire us. And actually, we continue to do that. We're developing a new film, and that's where we have our meetings, our story meetings, is while we're walking through the forest or
climbing a mountain. We climbed a mountain last weekend developing our new film.
Yeah, but in terms of Metamorphosis, what really started the spark for that and our process, because we made a film before together, Occupy Love, that I produced and Velcrow directed, and this is our first co-directing project together. It really started this particular project when it was just after Typhoon Haiyan had struck the Philippines in late 2013, and over 5,000 people were killed in that climate event, and it really started us really talking about this theme of change and how an event like that could change people. And also the climate crisis was feeling so much closer to us than it had before.
And Nova's family's Filipino, and they come from there.
Yeah, so it really sort of sparked that particular aspect of the project, and we so that kind of launched us into that direction.
And we came up with a visual language and a style, and we really wrote a script, but they were, as a documentary script it's open-ended, so we didn't know what the precise stories would be. So the first thing that happened was a massive climate event in Vanuatu in the South Pacific. That was the first big event to happen when we started shooting. So we weren't planning on going to Vanuatu, which is basically as in the middle of nowhere as you could imagine in the South Pacific, 4 hours flight from Fiji. But we went, and that was the first shoot. We spent a month there, and we actually at the time had a 4-month-old baby. He was conceived around the same time the film was conceived, and he went on the whole journey with us. And his grandma, Nova's mom, came with us as well on that shoot.
Yeah, so we had these sort of things carved out in our proposal or our script of things that we wanted to cover, except that we didn't know exactly what they were going to be. We knew we wanted to follow a climate event. We didn't know when and where, but we knew there was going to be something. And it just so happened to be right at the beginning of our production phase. And so we went with it. And then, we spent quite a bit of time in California, actually, and some of the things we filmed there, we didn't know we were going to film until we were there, because we would meet people who were involved in certain projects, and so part of that was unfolding as we were filming as well.
Yeah, you need a certain amount of trust and an openness to synchronicity.
I wonder if it would help to kind of bullet point the storylines that you cover, because it's really fascinating, and I don't know if everybody knows.
Bullet points, okay. Well, some of the things that we covered in Metamorphosis included the wildfires in California, and we filmed with a family there whose...
The Valley Fire.
Whose their whole community had burnt down. We also covered a sea level rise in Venice.
And there we worked with an underwater sculptor who casts human bodies and sinks them under the ocean. He was doing, and actually that was the next scene. That was in the Canary Islands and Mexico with the underwater sculptor.
So he was one of the artists that we followed.
His work kind of explores sea level rise and climate change and humans and their relationship to the environment.
That's right. Yeah. And we talked about Vanuatu, who was, they had just experienced the biggest cyclone they had ever experienced, ever. So we went there after that, in the aftermath. And
garden pool. We started looking at solutions. The film has an arc that goes from chrysalis to crisis to catharsis, looking at the psychological aspects of climate change, and concludes with symbiosis, which is stories of mutually enhancing relationships between humans and the environment. And so that we looked at stories like Garden Pool, which is repurposing swimming pools to turn them into self-sustaining ecosystems that can feed an entire neighborhood. Earthships, grid alternatives which puts free solar panels on low-income houses, and also trains people in becoming solar installers.
They include women and people of color in their training programs, and so it's a very inclusive project.
Yeah, different things like that. But you can come and see the film tonight. We didn't say when ours.
It's 6:40 this evening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, has it? Oh, yeah. Great. Okay, so...
shall we talk about distribution?
Yeah, and then we should open up to questions fairly soon, too, so we have time for that, because I know you have some burning questions out there. Pretty soon, just we'll do a couple more. Okay.
But first of all, let's talk about distribution and how you're getting your film out there. How will your films be seen? And in terms of, maybe some... Are any of you kind of exploring more, say, social impact strategies to get your film out there? And how are you going to reach your audience?
As I said previously, this film is commissioned by TalkBack, a division of First Look pictures, and so that online distribution already exists. And aside from that, film festivals, and I think that that's where this film is going to be, is sort of online, and then these film festivals.
We have a unique position with this film because of its support with Patagonia, which has a very active way to push a film out. But we wanted to make sure that we didn't just preach to the choir in this one. And so we kind of came up with a three-tiered strategy for screenings. There's first this store tour that we just started last night. Well, there was the ones in Europe, but last night in Portland, there was a screening of the first U.S. screening. And that'll go throughout the U.S. in stores to bring people in to talk about the issue, screen the film. And then we'll, of course, at Tribeca begin the festival tour, and we'll have a festival play. And then we're working with this wonderful group called Film Collective, and they actually work with films that they've vetted, and then they find ways to... Film Collective is actually Film Collaborative. Film Collaborative is helping us with a festival strategy, and then there's a new group called Picture Motion, used to be called Film Sprout, and they actually then will organize the third-party screenings. So if you said, hey, Ashland isn't on the list of places to screen this film, we want to bring a film in, then you can have the screening. They provide those materials for you. And then separately, we just, I think, have finalized an agreement with ICM, which is one of the big agencies, to be a sales rep for the film, so that we can try to get a placement on broadcast and possible, maybe limited theatrical. We're trying to figure that out right now as we speak.
Great.
So you play all cards that you can. Mm-hmm. You turn every stone over, because you never know what's under each stone.
Yeah.
I'm in a unique position because I have no support. Richard and this festival are my support group. So I don't have any plans.
But you launched at South by Southwest, which is really good. That's a
I
good
did,
start.
yeah. I played at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
It's a, yeah, well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We'll see what happens.
It's unfolding. The story is unfolding.
And I think the whole distribution platform is unfolding now.
Yeah,
because
it's changing so fast.
I mean, what we found is, like, the concern we had was, if we were to get onto a streamer like Netflix, does it just go there and die?
Yeah.
Because they don't give any metrics. You don't know how the film performs.
Yeah.
And you still have to point people, hey, it's there. But if they don't know it's there, why would they find it with whatever the film is? And I think it's a real challenge, because, as we were saying earlier, of how many films are out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, with Metamorphosis, we have the National Film Board of Canada as our distributor in Canada.
Yeah.
And we have been fortunate to release it theatrically across the country, as well as have numerous community screenings. And we've started screening the film in schools. And we've also developed a workshop called Metamorphosis Journey that Velcrow and I both lead. We're both trained coaches, as well as filmmakers. And so what that we do with that is we take people who've seen the film or not seen the film. You don't have to see the film to do the workshop. And it takes people deeper into the issues that we explore in the film. We lead exercises and guided meditations and partner work where the participants can explore how the crisis affects them personally and work to identify what their strengths are and how they can use those strengths to take action in their communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we also have an announcement about our U.S. release.
Yeah. We're launching theatrically on Friday in in Los Angeles at the Laemmle Theater. If you happen to be down there, it'll also be on VOD and a number of different platforms as well. So it's kind of a day and date thing.
Yeah.
And also for Earth Day, it's streaming. There's a limited streams on something called Metamorphic Convergence for free right now.
Films for the Planet is the website.
Yeah, and it's also in Canada, showing at libraries across Canada for free on Earth Month as well. So we've done, and the community screenings are also really satisfying and exciting, and we're going to move into things like house party screenings and things like that, and hopefully set up a kit where people can lead Metamorphosis Journey workshops themselves too, when we can't be there. Wow. So our last question, I know you're eager for these, is what's next? So anyone want to talk? Anyone feel like they want to talk about what's next if they can?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit.
Okay.
I've been working on a documentary for, I don't even know how long. It's like almost my whole life, but since I was a teenager. And it follows my family and my younger brother, Sam, since he was age 11, reckoning with a really traumatic event in his life. And thus, the process of that takes a really long time to understand. So it's, over 20 years of one person dealing with something. And right now that's being considered by ITVS, it's PBS's funding arm, to finish. Yeah.
Tomorrow's next. That's all.
Yeah, you're just starting.
Kind of getting through this little crazy period, but we actually are talking about developing more narrative features. We kind of feel like we could use a little rest from 2.5-year doc program,
Yeah.
and we do commercial work as well to kind of keep the lights on. So in the interim, we can keep working on that stuff and then develop some of these larger projects we'd like to do.
Yeah, for me also, I'm just starting with this film, so that'll be my next year. But and like Josh, I also I make educational content for the web, so that's how I pay the bills, and that'll be mostly what I do. Sorry, I'm really bad at being loud. Yeah, but then I have to be really close to the mic. No, I also make educational animated content for the web for TED, so that's what I do most of the time. And I won't be making another feature film until this one has had more of a full life, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've been on the road with Metamorphosis for a year, and we just received news that we're getting development funding for our next film, hence last week's Walk and Talk, and it's exploring the theme of wonder, and it's going to be a feature documentary about wonder. And that's about all we know right now, which is amazing that we got funding. Because we were invited to pitch this sort of internet broadcaster funder, and we had 3 projects. And then I was on the beach watching our 4-year-old son, and I texted Nova and I said, we should make a film about wonder. And then the next week we were going into this meeting, so we quickly wrote up a paragraph, and all the other ones were well developed, and they were like, we love it. And we're like, okay.
All right.
And we do too, actually. We're in the mood to do a film about wonder, and I think the world is ready for some wonder too. Yeah.
Can you just tell, I'm interested what National Film Board of Canada does, the process, because
Sure.
of course we're always trying to find something similar here,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
doesn't ever happen.
Yeah.
But it would be great just to have your
Sure.
experience.
Yeah, well, the National Film Board works with filmmakers in different ways. We worked with them as a co-production partner, so they didn't completely own the project. Actually, we had creative control. And so they were just one of the funders, a big piece of the funding in a pie of other funders. However, other filmmakers work with the National Film Board where it's an NFB full production, and so they cover everything. They fund the entire piece, and you're working with them in that capacity.
They're kind of like a government-run Hollywood studio. They're like a studio, and they can create films or co-produce films, commission films, and then distribute films, and they consider themselves creative partners. In Canada, when you are a broadcaster or have an internet company or whatever, you have to give a portion of your revenue towards cultural funding, and that helps fund various programs in Canada.
Oh, that's terrible social.
Yeah, it's horrible. And,
Fake news.
and their mandate is not commercial, it's cultural and artistic. So as partners, they're wonderful partners because they're not trying to figure out how to make a buck from your film. They're trying to make it the best film possible. So they're great partners to work with, and we're really honored. It's not easy to get funding from them, and especially for a feature, there's very few, like 5 a year or 3 or 4 a year that get funded, I think. So it's not exactly like this magic bullet, but they are wonderful, and there are other things like that in Canada too. There is quite a bit of focus on culture in our country. Yeah, great.
All right, so
Thank you.
So we'd love to open up to the audience if anyone has any burning questions they'd like to ask.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I look forward to all of your art. You touched upon the coaching sessions, and of course films often have websites and workbooks and things like that. And you also talked about the competition and the short attention span of the viewer. And what I'm wondering is, when you build your film, your storyline, we count on awareness. We put a lot of faith in, if people become aware of something, they'll take action. But that doesn't always work, especially when we at the film festival go from one great topic and great film to another. We go home exhausted. What do we do? So I'm wondering if, when you build your film, you've nested anything in there that either points people in a direction of either some way that they can take action, or some principle around which an action would influence what you're sharing. I'm wondering if you have found a way, or seen others build that in to be effective.
If you guys want to start with answering that?
Building in, this is
Action steps or ways that people can get engaged.
What do they call that in like the
Impact producing?
Impact. So yes, I think that it's a super valid point, and I mean one small level at a film festival is Q&A. You know, like having the filmmaker there, you can interact with them and ask them a question. I personally love it, and what you're talking about seems like a really advanced impact campaign, especially since you're both coaches. Like you're not only, you know, the creators of the artwork, but you can, you know, coach and help people to understand and connect with the artwork, and that sounds really, really incredible. I think with the family documentary I was talking about, there will be something of that ilk that we develop with some organization that fits family stuff, but that'll be developed kind of a little bit later in the process, and once we connect with that group. But I think that's really valid. You know, I noticed that as a participant of the film festival, that you walk away with so many different ideas, and it's, you know, you're kind of left in the lurch a little bit sometimes with sort of like, how do you process this, and what do you do next?
Yeah, I think it's film specific too. One of the things that struck me recently was the film Beautiful Boy, if you might have seen that. That's a narrative film based on a true story, but in narratives we don't normally see a call to action at the end. And there was a very direct call to action about getting involved with drug issues and mental health issues. And I think that was a choice by the filmmaker. And I think that's not the normal medium that a filmmaker uses, a narrative feature to do so. But I think you choose that at the outset, I think, and then you figure out how to develop it, be it through coaching or messaging or engagement at some other level. And for our film, for example, we were very interested in using this as a way to kind of get this issue, which is a little known issue, into the kind of greater conservation conversation, we say. So we knew that we weren't going to solve the issue, but if we could create a very active dialogue, then that means we're doing our job. And I think how you create that dialogue then comes back to what opportunities you have and what the film provides.
Answer?
Tell me about your coaching.
Oh, sure.
Sure.
Yeah, we're trained with coaching for transformation through Leadership That Works, and it's a transformational life coach process, and it's really about drawing out your own inner wisdom, and coaching doesn't tell you what to do. It helps you identify what you need to do from within, and it's also rooted in things like nonviolent communication as well. So, and very judgment free. And we find it really effective. And in our workshops, it's we actually have people break into peer coaching groups, and we have people interview each other and then reflect back what they hear from the other person as they work towards identifying their strengths, their gifts, and how they can plug into making the world a better place themselves, using their strengths. Bring those two things together and create action steps And we like to conclude the process with accountability, where you actually can get your partner to follow up and see how you're doing with your action steps that you decided to do. So
Velcrow.
one of the things is we're really taking action.
I was wondering if you could give a shining example of how this has worked in a Metamorphosis workshop.
You mean in terms of what some of the visioning work was led to? Or
What the conversation has brought out for people, what you've witnessed.
Yeah. Well, certainly something that keeps recurring is in terms of the participants really feeling appreciative of a container and a space, an intentional space, to be able to work through some of the feelings they're having around climate change, and really being able to process those feelings, because a lot of people are feeling overwhelmed and paralyzed. And so being able to create that space to really explore those feelings is something that's really valuable for people in the workshop. And also coming out of it with something concrete in terms of an action that they're going to work on. We ask our participants to take accountability for the action that they choose, and with their partner, they decide when they're going to do it by, and contact their partner and just keep in touch about what they're working on. So, they leave with something practical that they can apply. Yeah.
This guy also in the back of that.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
You guys have been around the world looking at all of the subtleties of the impending collapse at every level, and you've chosen to have a child. Would you speak into that process?
While we were making Metamorphosis, we had our baby with us. He was a baby at the time, and it was really, it brought up questions for us every day about what our role was as filmmakers and as parents. How do we prepare him for what's happening? How do we protect him? And it really gave us a mission with this film, that we were doing it for him. And it's also for us a symbol of hope, that we feel hopeful. And part of that is having a child and bringing him into this world and teaching him about, what we're doing and what we need to do to save ourselves.
And in fact, we named him Phoenix. Because that's the bird of hope rising from the ashes. So,
Hi, my name is Jonathan. There seems to be a lot of preaching to the choir. I've heard this yesterday and today, and it brings up an issue that I find really important, is how do you deal with a religious right that believes in the rapture and believes that there is no point in saving the environment. We're all going to heaven. So, how do you deal with that?
Are we all? I just thought they were going. Well, one thing that we're investing in is used clothing. There's this whole thing about when they're left behind, there's going to be these piles of clothes everywhere. So, vintage clothes and used clothes. Anyone have an answer to that question? That's a tough question.
Well, I think. We've got. I liked what you said at breakfast about. Or did you say that here at preaching the choir? We talked about it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's important to preach to the choir. I agree. I also think it's important to reach across your comfort zone and hopefully connect with somebody that you might not think you would connect with. So I am that way usually, and I think in this fire project, that's what we were going for. We didn't want to alienate anyone who might have certain beliefs or whatnot. So the approach was to look at empathy, of course, and go into that. How can we, connect with individual people and hear their stories? And I think that most people can agree that they can find connection with almost anyone if they're listening to a personal story. So leading with the personal story and letting the environmental story be the background was how this worked for me and the project.
Yeah, in our film, we approached it in the film as being a series of stories. And it's interesting because the story within the Judeo-Christian background, if you look like the book of Genesis, there's a dominion mandate that man shall have dominion over all things that creepeth on the earth.
Right, but different
Right.
translation, you got stewardship.
That's
and-
exactly
yeah.
right. So you have that, but then we also have the Yurok tradition in our film where they're talking about their creation story and what the creator asked of them to do. So I think you have to confront people with what are the meanings of the story, and that story is personal story. That story is a creation story, and how does that actually then trickle down into everyday life? And some people will be very literal with that, and other people, as you say, will have a little wider berth in what they describe of, in this case, like dominion. And you're right, though. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was with John Muir, wonderful story at one point, and they were in Yosemite, and John Muir had Teddy Roosevelt and he get on their heads and do headstands, and there supposedly is a photo of this. And he said, "You want to see my heaven? Now look up." And so it was his way of saying heaven is earth, but you have to change your perspective to get there. And so I think that's what stories do. They help us change our perspective or have some context of it.
You've answered so many questions that I had written down already, but I had one about the technical filming. And one of you mentioned about moving from 16 millimeter to a more maybe sophisticated. But I know some of the films in the festival have been talking about being made on cell phones. And for those of us who don't feel like we have enough years left to work on funding, is there something that maybe, or at least the filming of it, can you give us some advice of those of us who would like to make film on a very small format, like cell phones?
Sure. I mean, 16 millimeter actually is a superior. It's just no one shoots in film anymore. It's kind of gone. But 16 millimeter is beautiful, and 35 as well. But nowadays you can get gear is cheap. The software is cheap. You can have the quality of just about anybody in terms of the actual acquisition devices. Cell phones can shoot in 4K now. The trick is to just use stabilizers and tripods and things like that. You can, if you're going to use a cell phone, or get a DSLR like a Panasonic GH5. They have one that's about, I think they have a version of the GH5, one down from that, which is under $1,000, and it shoots in 4K and it's low light and it's a great camera. So you can get pretty cheap, great cameras now. Just find one that shoots in 4K, and then that's just optimal now, because everything's going to be 4K soon.
So my question is directed to the gentleman at the end that did the fire documentary. So you had mentioned that fire was started by a young teenage individual. Does your documentary, does part of that kind of profile the effect of that action by the individual in his life? I think that'd be kind of an interesting story to kind of, learn how that action by that individual and the resulting fire from that, what was that impact on their life? And does your film kind of explore that?
Yeah, what was the impact on the teen who started the fire, or who threw the firework that started the fire? Our intention, this goes back to intention, but when doing this film was just that. We really wanted to know what this kid went through and his family went through, and if we could have, we would have tracked that story, and that would have been the central focus of the narrative. We were not able to get access to this kid. He's been kept under wraps. The counties have done a really good job protecting his identity because he's gotten death threats. His family's gotten death threats. The media went pretty wild with that storyline, and even people like environmentalists were enraged and blaming this kid. You know, it was just maybe, of course, I don't know, but like the most kind of liberal kind of people were so angry at this kid, and that was really curious to us. You know, like, okay, like why is this happening, and how are we so susceptible to these the stories we're fed by the news? I mean, this ties into like fake news and all that, and that's BS. But the news local news media does tend to sensationalize some stories because they do want to catch readers. They want you to pay attention, and you know, if you say something really inflammatory, people are going to read it. And I think it's really hard to differentiate and say like, okay, this is affecting me really emotionally, but I should also read into and find other stories about this. I mean, that's why we made the film, is to explore that concept. And I think that it does come back to individuals like us to tell these stories, rather than relying on news sources.
I think also something to add to that would just be that I think to answer a lot of the questions that have been sort of posed is that I feel like fear and anger are so much easier to instigate than any sort of empathy or love, and that's just an easy thing to focus on, regardless of who the source is, whether it's media, whether it's filmmakers, anything like that. That if you can just ignite caring and empathy as opposed to fear and hatred, I think that's the goal of any filmmaker, maybe.
I do want to just respond, kind of finish off that question, though. In the film, you do get to see an interesting arc of perspective of the eyewitness that witnessed the kid throw the firework and pointed him out. And she comes to realize, you know, that the news handled this in a horrible way and that she really needs to tell a different story. So we get the story in there, but it's not exactly tracking the point of view of the kid.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up pretty soon, right? When are we supposed to be finished?
Yeah.
A really quick question.
4 more minutes. Yeah.
Yes, it's 11:11. Sure. Lucky number.
Was there a moment in any of your films where bringing cameras into the environment actually represented a kind of a, moving into a space that you were trying to prevent? So cameras in the environment can, and especially now that there are so many people that are aspiring filmmakers and, seeing what you're doing and bringing cameras into the environment. What is there a responsibility around that? And
Well, I think documentary filmmakers need to be extraordinarily sensitive and responsible and respectful. It also depends on the situation. I mean, there are times when, and Josh, you might want to speak to that, where you need to, when you're going for somebody who is the evil doer and you need to get them on camera, and that's, sometimes you need to just be brash in that way. But in general, you really need to be, for us, we prioritize the situation and the moment and the needs of the community. And, we're always quick to say, anyone doesn't want to be filmed, let us know if there's a group situation that, so respect is our number one credo, for sure. Anyone else?
I would echo that and say, our film, there was a lot of people that didn't want to talk, as we said, and so we explained what we were doing, but we couldn't explain the total depth. But we wanted people to still be honest, because one thing you find is if you tell somebody what you're doing and they presuppose what that is, then they have a reason to judge and therefore not react as they might normally. And so we wanted to give people a stage, if you will, to be able to speak their truth. And so we were trust is the number one thing, but you have to be careful about what you say, because saying too much creates distrust on their end. And I think further, when you have cameras, it's really interesting because cameras can get really small now. You can shoot with a phone. We were shooting in 5K, so on a bigger camera. It's not a huge camera, but it's a cinema camera. And we actually began shooting with more stabilization, a lot more gear, and we just realized that got in the way of us telling stories. We were so focused on moving gear and people around that we missed stories. And so in the middle of our process, we totally stripped it down, and it was myself and a cinematographer. I ran audio, directed, he shot, or she shot in many cases, and then other times it was just me. And so the smaller you got, the more access we got. And so you have to kind of decide where you can push and where you can ease up. And if somebody's totally willing, you can bring the whole thing in. But even then, we had totally willing people that they saw the camera come out and they just freeze up. And just like you said, you know, you can do an audio interview with just a microphone here and have a conversation with somebody and then go film them doing something else. And they open up beautifully because you're not prejudging your image. You know, when you have just a microphone in front of you, you just feel like, yeah, it's just me talking.
Yeah, it's very awkward.
Yeah.
Well, our secret is to bring a baby with us at all times.
Yeah, that warms people up.
That really helped. In Vanuatu, it was amazing because suddenly we were a family making a film. Are
there rental houses with that? You can just...
You can borrow a baby.
We got a 4-year-old, but they don't work as well.
Yeah.
Sure, let's do one last question, then we should wrap up.
Thank you all for coming. We love you here, and we love seeing your films. And so first, thank you, and welcome to Ashland. And my question is, we talk about the transformation and the transformative nature of films, and especially, I think, documentaries, at least for me, and in shifting our views and changing how we think and see the world. And what I would like to ask, if you're willing to share, is was there a moment in the process for yourselves where you encountered someone, a character or an instance, where it shifted you and it transformed you? And if you'd be willing, and then if that did occur, how did you incorporate it into your film?
Sure. Does anyone want to share a moment, transformative moment?
I mean, to me, the reason I make films is for those moments. And most of my films, this being an exception because it's narrative, are very much about immersing myself in a culture that I don't know and I don't understand, and getting to really see it from the inside out and trying to represent them in a way that they feel represents themselves. So, yeah, to me, that's the whole point right there.
I agree.
Yeah, we had one point that I think was the most, I guess, transformative for me, which we filmed a scene where this certain hatchery catches fish as they're about to spawn. They're on their nests. They yank them off the nest and they kill the fish and they split them open and they take the eggs and the milk and they combine them. And the guys that we were watching do this do a very good job and believe wholeheartedly that what they're doing is right. And after capturing the footage, I remember calling Laura and Colin and saying, I was actually like a little freaked out because I'm like, if this gets in the film and it's done wrong, these people will lose their jobs and they'll be vilified. And so then you get to a point where you say, I now have this subject. How do you treat it with authenticity so that it still speaks to their worldview without making it something totally sensational? If you were Sacha Baron Cohen and you were trying to like egg somebody into something, it's different. But if you're acting from honesty first, you still get to a point where you're like, oh my goodness. And for this one, it just reaffirmed in me the kind of return to honesty. Just make sure that people, no matter what they say what they believe so that their perspective is real. And the rest will work itself out.
There were a couple of moments that stand out for me. One of them being filming in the butterfly sanctuary in Mexico and just being surrounded by millions of monarch butterflies. It was an experience that I was looking forward to, but I had no idea what it was going to feel like to actually be in the same space and just being so close and witnessing them in their natural habitat and environment, and just so many of them all at once. And it was really a wonder moment for me, and feeling this connection with the butterflies that I hadn't felt before, just by the sheer magnitude of having them all surrounding us like that. It was really quite amazing.
And for me, I think in that moment, there was a special moment where Nova was holding our son, who at the time was a year old, and he was asleep. And she was covered in butterflies all over her hair, and he was covered in butterflies. And then a butterfly landed on his nose, and he just opened his eyes, and he couldn't really speak, but he could say butterfly, he could say baba, that was butterfly, and he went, Baba. And the look of wonder in his face, I think, is going to be part of the inspiration for our next film. So, well, thank you all so much for coming. It was great talking to you all. Thanks to the filmmakers.